Day.
Yeah.
fellas.
Well, for those of you who are mothers,
Yeah.
probably some non-moms watching too.
Well, I said fellas.
Don't try to box me in, Alan.
I was wishing you two a happy Mother's Day.
All right.
I see us on here. Yeah,
I see us on.
Awesome.
Sweet.
And we are finishing the book today.
I know. It seems like just yesterday we were kicking this thing off, and now six weeks later, we're in business.
That's right.
That's
Yeah.
and this isn't going to be the last session. At least I don't think it is. I think we're going to do one more, kind of a Q&A with the author, with Greg Koukl. And so I guess we should say
Greg Koukl.
Yeah, Greg Koukl. We should say hi to everyone. We are Stand to Reason, and we're doing the Stand to Reason book club, finishing off Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. We are covering the last 4 chapters, chapter 16, 17, 18, and 19 today. And at least I think that's what we'll get through. It's quite a bit of material, but we should be able to handle it. And then next week we'll do something special with Greg. So stay tuned for that. See people jump in the chat. That's awesome. So guys, I presume you read the rest of the book. I'm hoping you did. Or this is going to be a real short episode.
Yeah, I mean, no, I read it.
Yeah. And actually, I found these last 4 chapters to be really valuable. There's some good stuff in here. Although we'll take it one by one. Let's start with chapter 16. We'll get right into it. Chapter 16 called Just the Facts, Ma'am, which is kind of an old reference, I guess, to a TV show. I wasn't familiar with it. Were you guys familiar with that?
Well, I never watched the show, but I've heard Greg talk about it for decades now. So
okay. It was a movie too. Do you guys remember the movie with Tom Hanks?
I didn't watch it.
I used to watch it when I was like a little kid. My parents used to watch it.
Well, so we get the concept. The concept is, many challenges are essentially based on bad information, right? And so Greg, I think wisely says, you might just need to ask, for the facts, or you might need to state the facts. And he has this really cool line from Dennis Prager: first the truth, right?
Yeah.
And then the opinion, then give your opinion. So for chapter 16, anything jump out at you guys? Anything you want to highlight? Maybe we'll start with Alan.
Yeah, I'll just admit right up front, it's not one of my favorite tactics.
Really?
Yeah, I think you like it, John, don't you?
I like this one. I like it, dude. I like it because you don't have to do anything.
Well, but see, that's so you don't have to do anything so long as you know that there's something amiss about the facts. And so actually this one, and I'm going to complain about the next chapter as well when I get there, but okay, so don't get me wrong. It is a valuable tactic. The problem with it, for me at least, is that it requires, again, a tremendous amount of knowledge and insight into the actual facts of the situation. Even if you don't know the facts, like Greg seems to know that there's something amiss about the facts that are presented. And that's why he's able to say, well, what are the facts? For example, the 2 examples he gives. One was that
violence and religion.
The founding fathers, like somebody said, oh, well, the founding fathers were deists. And he's like rattling off how many Episcopalians, how many Presbyterians. I'm like, okay, I guess if you're like, Mr. Britannica Encyclopedia, you might know that, right?
Yeah.
But probably the average person, even the average Christian, doesn't know how many Episcopalians, Baptists, Presbyterians, whatever there were of the founding fathers, and how many were deists and how many were theists. And like, okay, that's, great, he does. And then the other example is the one where, how they say, well, religion is a number one cause for, wars. And then he's able to like rattle off the dates of wars and the battles and how many people died under certain leaders. And I'm like, okay, that's great. I mean, I mean, I've studied that, and so I know it. But had I never like taken the time to study that, that's not something that I would just kind of randomly know, or even know to question.
But Alan, up front, he says, he even says, and often the information is just a few keystrokes away. So I don't know. I think I'd push back at you a little bit. I think this is the same thing as using Columbo 2. It's like, well, how did you come to that conclusion? And now you tell me, you lay your facts out and let me know where they are, because like a lot of times, I don't know about you, but when you're talking to people, oh man, maybe not so much like, I guess it's just not when I'm talking to friends who haven't ever really looked into these things, it becomes clear on both sides of the coin too. It's important to be fair. It becomes clear that they don't know what they're talking about. And like when somebody makes the claim, for example, religion is the cause for all the violence in the world. I think without knowing the facts and all the statistics, you can ask the question, how'd you come to that conclusion? What do you mean, the religion? And then forced to take the next step, you have to know something about it, about the world wars. So I guess I get your point.
Yeah. No, I mean, in fact, I remember him. I remember that section where he says it's just a few clicks away, or in his case, they were just like he had studied it in some book or something like that. Yeah. So I get it. I'm not saying that you can't investigate it, but the examples he gave are examples that I think the average person, including myself, wouldn't have just known off the top of my head and be able to say, oh, well, wait a minute. The facts of the matter are that the founding fathers weren't all deists. Most of them were theists. And, more people have died under communist, or non-theistic worldview religious systems than have died under a religious system. So,
Yeah, I think the other problem I think that can arise, Greg says it's just a couple clicks away, a Google search away. There's a problem with that now because there's so much, fake news, or you can find an article online that affirms pretty much every opinion out there, right? And so this is part of the danger, is going to Google now to verify something. And so it's true. If you know where to look and who is a credible source, then that works. But if you don't, you can get lost, on the internet. And so that could be a problem as well. I think you're right, John, that, you can ask the question, what do you mean by that? How did you come to that conclusion? So they say that wars, let them give, have you ask them. So you've read the Encyclopedia of War, or, these kinds of things. Even if you don't know the information, you can at least go back to the other Columbo 2 that we talked about. But I guess, as we learn, I guess we're supposed to be learning. This is knowledge, wisdom, character. As we accumulate more knowledge, we're able to, draw upon those facts, right? So yeah, I'm with you. I think the examples Greg gave were, I certainly, when I can't rhyme those stats off, right? But there are other challenges that come up. Like all religions are basically the same.
Right.
Right. You could ask the question, how did you come to that conclusion? Or you could actually, state just the facts, ma'am, and actually know they're not all the same,
right.
And you could go that route. And I think most people are aware that there are some pretty fundamental differences between the world religions, even the closest, monotheistic religions. So I think it depends on the topic. So I think it does have some value. I think especially when he started talking about just the context, ma'am, I love that, right? Because that's when you need to ask, there's lots of verses that get plucked out of context. And Alan, you can plug your live stream where you've been kind of going through how to interpret scripture. That's every Wednesday?
Yeah.
What time?
Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific time.
Yeah.
But it's if you've missed it, it's also still on Facebook, of course, and we're posting them also on YouTube, Understand the Reason channel. So
yeah, and so the idea that you need to understand the context, never read a Bible verse, this kind of thing. I think that's really helpful for talking to other Christians and other people who are citing Scripture. That comes in handy, and that you don't need necessarily go to a Google search. You just pull out the Bible, and this is real easy. Let's just go and read the text itself, right? So I thought that was a really cool kind of application as well.
In this chapter, I really appreciated, and this actually kind of goes, I guess it kind of goes to what you're saying, Alan, too. But I appreciated the whole section about precision is persuasive.
Yeah.
I remember my very first class in grad school was a research and writing class, and Clay Jones was teaching it, and he made a very clear point, you should try to never exaggerate in your writing. Like, and this is a joke that I have because I'm also a pastor. So like all pastors exaggerate, right? If there's 100 people in the audience, there's 300.
Yeah.
That's what you say. Yeah. So it's like, but it's really important that if you are going to state the facts, that your facts are precise. And not only that they're precise just for honesty's sake. Greg, I think in the book uses the example of how many people were killed at 9/11.
Right.
When you have precision in your numbers, like when you know that 2,977 people lost their lives on 9/11, you can state that in the course of a conversation. There's a weightiness to it, right. And even if it's something like this, instead of estimating or instead of saying a lot of people, it adds, I guess, an air of credibility to you. Like, oh wait, this person knows what they're talking about. You've obviously done the reading in this. Yeah, And as I'm wrestling even through like this kind of stuff, and I completely understand what you're saying, Alan, but then that's where all the other tactics kind of come in play, which is so cool because I'm thinking like I'm always role playing in my mind. What happens if I get myself into a conversation and somebody else knows the facts and I just don't know the facts? Well, then that's where I can rely on the Columbo questions, and that's where I can get out of the hot seat, and that's it's just so cool. Like as we come to the back third of the book, I guess, or more, the back quarter, you see it all kind of coming back together. Yeah. And I just really appreciated Greg's attention to calling us to be attentive to details. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because there's power in the details, which is good.
Yeah.
I think one qualifier, this kind of occurred to me as I'm reading through this chapter, is that there was a book that came out called Myths and Mistakes. And it's about just the facts that a lot of apologists cite. Are you reaching it for there, John?
He's got it right there.
And it looks at some of the numbers that, apologists have given, I myself have given, on the number of manuscripts for the Greek New Testament, the time gap between those manuscripts, the comparison with other ancient works like the Iliad or Odyssey, these kind of things. So I used to think giving the precise number, that's what we should do. And so, because that's what I saw Dan Wallace and some of these other guys doing, 5,839. That's how many Greek New Testament manuscripts. That was the number that everyone's throwing around. Well, it turns out when you read this book, they say, well, you know what? You probably shouldn't be that precise because there are some duplicates in there. Some things have been double counted. There was a number. Some of those manuscripts are so tiny that they shouldn't even be in the list. This kind of thing. Mm. Maybe they're parts of another manuscript, and they have two, but it's really one. And so they said probably 5,300, maybe even say 5,100 to be ultra conservative. So there's an example where I agree with Greg. When we know the facts, we should be precise. Here was an example where I thought I was being precise,
right,
and to make my point, but I actually lost credibility And this is why I won't give a talk on that until I've looked and double checked and make sure everything's in line, right? I don't want to be giving false information. I don't want to be comparing numbers that are apples and oranges, right? And this was part of the issue. We're given the most up-to-date manuscript for the Greek New Testament, but we're still relying on numbers for, Tacitus and some of these other guys, Homer from 60 years ago. And so, this is where I think, and I guess I don't want to get off topic here, but precision's important. But sometimes we overstate when we're precise, right? There can be that overconfidence or overstating our case. We don't need to do that. And so let's be as conservative as we can with those numbers. All right, you guys want to add anything else, or do you want to move on?
No, we can move on. I mean, there's a lot in there. I think that was good,
Yeah.
but we can move on. That's all right.
Yeah, we got. I mean, we got
4 chapters, so
we do. Yeah, it's more to cover, more ground to cover this time around. How about chapter 17, Inside Out? This was I really liked reading Greg in this chapter. It gave a totally different feel. I felt like I was reading Ravi Zacharias. Okay. Yeah. It was like he got into the existential issues. He got into, kind of the evangelist Greg versus the apologist, kind of giving the gospel. And here's how I do that. I talk about guilt and I talk about forgiveness, this kind of thing. I don't know. When I was reading through it, and even, I'll be honest, I have the audio book as well, not just the print. So listening to Greg, yeah, seriously, which actually is, for those listening, is really cool because it's Greg who reads it.
Yeah.
And Greg does a great, and just the tone of voice, this is why I'm bringing that up, just the way he reads it, it just like changes in this chapter. It's so interesting. So I have a lot to say about this chapter, but I want you guys to jump in first. Maybe we'll go around again, start with you, Alan.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, Tim, if what you're saying is the reason why for that is that it's written 10 years later, right? This is one of the chapters that Greg added.
Yeah.
Where there's a lot more, like fine wine has matured. I mean, not that he was immature before, but there's a different kind of like he's grown in a lot of ways, and you also see a lot of the Francis Schaeffer stuff that I mentioned that has influenced him over the years coming out in this particular chapter as well. It's a great chapter. I too really enjoyed reading it. I'll add my annoyance though about it. In fact, he even says this. I'm trying to remember what page it was on. I think I wrote it down. But he even said, he goes, this isn't a specific maneuver, but a frame of mind. Okay.
Yeah.
The ability to identify someone saying something that when they kind of are more explicit about, like they're almost like they're talking out of both sides of their mouth. Dawkins complains about, well, first he says there's no purpose, no meaning, no life, whatever. Then he complains that God is unpleasant, bloodthirsty, whatever. Yeah. It's like, well, wait a minute. Where does that judgment come from? Mm-hmm. You can't have that sort of assessment, an objective standard assessing someone's behavior or morals if there's no God to in the first place, right? So it's incredibly important to be able to recognize that. But again, as he points out, it's a state of mind. It's not really a tactic. And what I love about what you're seeing here, and you even pointed out, Tim, is that he sounds a lot like Ravi Zacharias here, who is someone who's got incredible insight and can draw upon all sorts of amazing aspects about life and history and ideology, and draw them in and present them like on the spot. Yeah. Which again, I think is amazing. Don't get me wrong, I love it, and that's what I love. Being influenced by Greg and being mentored by him for so long. But it's really hard to do that. I mean, unless you're someone like a Ravi or the Greg Koukl, So anyways, that's why I felt like this chapter
Or
7.
Alan Shlemon.
Yeah, I wish, but like chapter 16 to 17, I think are both like that, where part of the amazingness about these two chapters stems from the fact that it's Greg writing this, and not not me or you guys. It's like he's just got an amazing gift to be able to draw from so much knowledge or wealth of knowledge and experience, and all these things.
Yeah, if people don't have the book, I think Inside Out is solid ground as well. People can go to str.org and actually read this chapter or something very close to it on our website as well.
Yeah. And so, but I'll add this, that I think, both the previous chapter 16, Just the Facts Man, and the Inside Out chapter, which I think are hard for me and maybe even the average person to do. But I think it all comes down to two things, which number one would be slowing down. Like when you're in a conversation and you're confronted with an objection, you don't know what to do. And sometimes we're tempted to just kind of like try to respond quickly or get involved. But I think it's a mistake. I think the best advice, at least for me, is to slow down. Okay. Number one, slow down. Number two, ask Columbo questions. Yeah. What do you mean by that? Tell me more how you got to that conclusion. Explain to me. Like if you just did those two things, slow down and ask Columbo questions, it will help you have the ability to achieve success in Just the Facts Man or just the Inside Out tactic, because otherwise those are hard tactics to do, to complete, to do in the midst of a conversation where you're in with someone who's got expressing a hostile worldview or a hostile objection. But if you slow the conversation down, say, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? Tell me what you mean here. Explain to me your view. How did you come to that conclusion? I think that gives you the best chance to be able to deliver on these tactics. And so, I know Greg talks about this, but I'm just trying to make that more explicit, that that's the best way, I think, to make these two tactics achievable for the average person.
Yeah. John, before we jump to you, I just want to point out, Ron here says, since the writing style is different in this chapter, obviously Greg isn't really the author.
That's right. Yeah.
Which is, kind of poking fun of, they'll find, Second Peter or something and say, hey, this is a little different, from First Peter. And so maybe this isn't the same author. Look at the different writing style. And
Moses didn't write the end of the Torah, right?
Yeah.
So he was dead.
I like that. And I actually agree with Patty. This occurred to me as I was reading it. Yeah. The tone of the chapter reminds me, as well as Patty here, of the story of reality. I thought the exact same thing as I was reading through it.
Yeah. We wrote it at the same time. So.
Yeah, that's probably. That's goes back to what you were saying, Alan. You have him writing story of reality, and then going back to this idea. And I'm sure there's a few chapters actually where I noticed that there were some lines there that, man, they were very similar to things he said in the story of reality. Very, very cool. All right, John, you're up.
Well, it's kind of going on the heels of what you were just talking about a little bit, and I think Patty was right on. The tone is almost pastoral to me. It definitely switched, and which I really liked. And then when you said it sounded kind of like Ravi. It does a little bit, And one of the things that I really like about it, Alan, you were kind of hinting at this a little bit, but I feel like all of these tactics are meant for us not just to learn tactics to win a conversation, but to engage in conversation with people who are made in the image of God, with people who have souls who are of infinite value and worth. So it's not just like a game of chess where it's getting the checkmate, game over, I win. Mm-hmm. It's hopefully with a heart for these people, because oftentimes, most likely, we're using them on people who don't believe in God. And this is the most important conversation. Honestly, I think it's the most important conversation we could be having with this person at this time, whatever the conversation is and whoever the person is. So in that way, I feel like this tactic in particular, Inside Out, it allows us to move towards a conversation that's a little bit more relational, because what we're doing is relying on common experiences. And now experiences aren't always, or we can rely on common experiences. Now, common experiences aren't always an argument, right? I mean, I understand that, but I think for me, the most powerful conversations that I've had where I've mixed in some of these tactics in my own life, and it's been kind of pointing stuff out. Like in Greg and other writings and presentation stuff, he says bumps into reality, right? And he introduces kind of this concept, I think he does in this chapter, why do we feel guilty? Everybody feels guilty, but why? And one of the things is, for me, walking from atheism to Christianity, was that idea of why do I feel guilty, or this idea of the soul, for example, right? I mean, we don't talk about the soul, I think, nearly enough, but we can certainly we have the ability to introspect. Like we know we have an awareness of ourselves, and where's that come from? Because it's not naturalistic, I don't think, or at least a naturalistic answer to these questions doesn't do it. And I feel like that's kind of where Inside Out is leading us. It's saying, okay, we live in this world, and Greg says it in this chapter, we live in this world that God made. We're all created in the image of God. Whether you believe in God or not, these things are true.
Right.
So the world is a certain way, and we all interact with the world in ways that are similar. I mean, not exactly the same, and the answers and the solutions to issues might be different, but we still have the problem of evil, for example.
Yeah.
And I feel like the Inside Out stuff helps us break things down to a more relatable, maybe get a little bit more personal with somebody. Because you start talking about somebody's experiences, then you can learn a little bit even more about who they are, the depth of their character, the depth of their emotions, what they've been through. We talked about it a little bit last time, where sometimes the reasons why people don't believe in God aren't really the reasons they're saying. And then, like we said, it's across the board, right? Sometimes people believe in God, and their belief in God isn't for good reasons either. But anytime that, for me personally, anytime that I get to know somebody a little bit better in the course of the conversation and listen and hear their struggle is one more time that I get to actually get a little bit closer to the real reasons why they're rejecting God. And you get to know them as a person a little bit more, and you get to realize, wow, this person has actually been through a lot, or they struggle with certain things. And I feel like Inside Out allows us to relate in that way, because we can ask the important questions. Well, obviously you feel like you've been wronged. Yeah. Why do you think you have this feeling that you've been wronged? Where does that come from? As an example, but that's why I guess maybe this chapter, one of the reasons why I liked it so much is probably because of his change in voice a little bit.
Yeah.
It's more my type of style.
Yeah.
As opposed to just a straight apologist. And it's very similar to Story of Reality.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of this stuff is in Story of Reality.
I think
so unlike Alan, who hated this chapter, I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Yeah. I'm with you, John, on that. Although I'm with Alan in the sense that I don't know if this chapter adds, I think what it does, it gives the rationale behind other things that he's taught in the book. So when he's talking about taking the roof off, and spotting, where they were inconsistent and all these things, the reason that it comes up, the reason that happens is because of Inside Out. It's because they're made in the image of God. They live in God's world. There's something going on the inside. Eventually it shows itself on the outside, right? Yeah. And that's when you have the opportunity to say something, to ask a question or whatever. So, I think that it's almost like Greg could have put this chapter at, early in the book, because like here's what's going on, and now I can make sense of taking the roof off and all these other things, because this person can't live consistent, for example, to relativism. They can spout off relativism, but in here they can't be a relativist. Not on the inside, right? So I don't know. I'm just giving Greg some advice here.
I just realized something. Wow. Look who gets a sight.
Who?
Oh, John Noyes. Oh.
Yeah.
Is it for that chapter?
Yeah. So right at the end, This is really funny to me. I'm sorry to bring it up.
I'm sure
He says, here's our remedy, stated simply. I knew this sounded familiar. Stated simply in a Christmas card I received from a friend. It's from my Christmas card years ago. The birth of Christ invites us to believe that the cries of a broken world have actually been heard. A Savior was born. That's really funny. Maybe that's why I like the chapter so much.
Yeah, that's right.
That is why I thought, you know what, I got to find out who sent that Christmas card, because I definitely want to become friends with that guy.
Yeah, well, it's hard to become friends with him.
Yeah. All right. So here's so Chris has just reiterating something. He said, slow down. This is what Alan was pointing out. Good tip. Easy to race ahead just to win a conversation. And that is so true. Instead of tactically embedding stones in the shoes. And that's what we want to do. We want to put a stone. And I think at the end, in the last chapter, Greg makes I think it's the last chapter. He's giving kind of 8 insights. And he says, don't just, leave him with something. You don't have to leave him with everything. You don't have to put like 8 stones in the shoe. Just give him a stone, So that's good. Sam asked a question. What's your opinion on, maybe we'll come back to this at the end. Or this may be a good discussion point with Greg when we bring him in.
Later, he said for Greg.
Okay. What's your opinion on predestination? If all men are born into sin and destined for hell, but for the grace of God, some but not others. So yeah, this is
for John.
Yeah. So actually, and this
question for all of us, wouldn't it?
So what I would say to this question is we probably won't answer it right now, but this will be a really good if you come back next week. Because we've actually asked Greg to do some mentoring on this particular topic, kind of in-house, just to get his point of view, because he has kind of a strange, some might consider kind of a strange hybrid view, where he is a Calvinist, and yet he holds to libertarian freedom when it comes to most every decision, except for salvation. So
Careful.
So John has a different view than say I do, and I'm not entirely sure what Alan's view is on this.
Yeah, Alan stays pretty tight-lipped.
But
Alan conveniently goes missing when we start discussing this topic. I gotta go to the bathroom, guys. See you later.
So certainly everyone holds to predestination because that's a word in the Bible, but we would hold to there's different interpretations of what that entails. So
I just believe what Amy Hall believes.
Yeah, so it's fun because our staff, it's really cool actually, that our staff at STR is kind of divided on lots of theological issues. And so we hold to classical Christianity, and there's differences within our organization on these issues. No one, when they were hiring me, they didn't say, Tim, what is your view on predestination? And if I said the right answer, they'd check the box, that kind of thing. We'll save that because next week's all going to be Q&A with Greg, and we may spend an hour talking about this. You know what I'm saying? So we'll come back to that.
Tim, did you give your take on chapter 17? You did, yeah.
Yeah. I just
He hated it like you.
That's right.
It wasn't a maneuver. It was just an insight that made sense now of what we were doing in the past, when it came to some of these other tactics. But like you, John, I actually loved the tone and how it was written. I could have read a whole book in that style. It just, to me, I love listening to Ravi Zacharias. I love reading his stuff, and that's what it reminded me of. Okay, let's go to chapter 18. Are you guys good with that?
Yeah, mini tactics.
Yeah, these are so good. Use these all the time. And so let's just say chapter 18 and pick one of the, there's 5 of them. So we may not hit all of them, but pick one or two and tell me what you like, don't like, that kind of thing.
So what a friend we have in Jesus. I use a similar tactic, but I call it letting Jesus take the heat. So it's the same approach, but I just call it letting Jesus take the heat. In other words, when someone asks you about, why do you, believe Jesus is the only way? Well, instead of taking the heat myself by saying because and giving an explanation as if it's my explanation, I say, well, that's because Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So I'm a follower of Jesus. I got to accept what he says. So in other words, I let him take the heat or the blame for my view. So anyways, that is to me an actual tactic, unlike the previous 2 chapters. No, I'm kidding. So I do like that one. Sticks and Stones. Yeah, this is great. Also, I remember using this before I even knew the tactic. I was invited invited to speak at a university, I think in Michigan. It was a secular university. It may have been Central Michigan University, but it was a university audience presentation where they said you got 20 minutes to defend the pro-life view, and then you have to take a question from anyone in the audience, or take questions for like an hour from people in the audience. So in the first 20 minutes, of course, one of the things I did was I gave a scientific defense for the full humanity of the unborn from the moment of conception. Mm-hmm. And then I did my whole pro-life presentation, and then I started taking questions. So I was, we were doing questions, Q&A for an hour or so. And at one point, somebody got up to the microphone and they said, well, you're just anti-woman. And so this is actually an example of Sticks and Stones, where they're basically calling me a name. It's an ad hominem, I'm anti-woman, And I don't remember the exact way I phrased my response, but I said something to the extent of, well, let's just say what you're saying is true. Let's say I am anti-woman. Let's say I don't like women. I hate women. Okay. Even if that's true, how does that affect the scientific defense that I just gave an hour ago for the full humanity of the unborn from the moment of conception? I go, it doesn't, right? I could be anti-woman. I could be misogynist. I could be homophobic. I could be a bigot. I could be a Nazi. Yeah. And it still wouldn't change the merits of the argument that I offered earlier, because my character or who I am has nothing to do with the merits of the argument. So that was kind of my way of diffusing the name calling that was going on.
Do you think that was the mini tactic, the power of so, kind of worked in there too?
It was both, yeah. So it's in a comment that it was also the other one that I love is the power of so. I really love this mini tactic as well. And Greg had a great example of this in a tweet he did. I can't remember how long ago it was, maybe like 3 months ago. And he gives an example of the point in the chapter. But in the tweet, he had this little 2-sentence dialogue. First, an atheist makes a statement, then a Christian responds. And the atheist says, if you were born in Iraq, you wouldn't be a Christian. And then Greg responds with the Christian saying, well, if you were born in Iraq, you wouldn't be an atheist. Now what? It was a great tweet. I mean, he like hundreds of people were like, engaging that tweet. But it totally gets the point. Okay, you're right. If I was born in Saudi Arabia, I'd be a Muslim. Okay, so what? Does that prove Islam is true, that Christianity is false, that atheism doesn't prove anything?
Yeah.
It's just simply a sociological assessment.
Yeah.
Okay, but it doesn't say anything about the merits of one person's worldview versus another, Yeah. So yeah, the power of so is awesome. I mean, I actually moved towards the objection. I love that one too. Actually, this whole chapter was great. I don't know.
It made up for the last two.
Well, the last two were good stuff, but I just felt here's the
finally Greg does something good.
Yeah, finally. It's just that the previous 2 tactics are hard to succeed unless you bring in outside information in.
Yeah.
Whereas, say, taking the roof off, for example, you can just use the information you have in the argument or in the moment at the time and be able to use the tactic,
Yeah.
The power of so, same thing. They, if you were born in Iraq, you wouldn't be a Christian. Okay. So what's that proof? So notice you don't have to be able to have an encyclopedia knowledge to draw from to be able to use the tactic. That's why these mini tactics, I think, are great. Even moving towards the objection, you can just do that without having any additional knowledge.
Yeah.
So, anyways, this chapter was an amazing addition to the 10th anniversary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think, John?
I have very similar. I mean, he kind of hit up all of them. So I would lump like watch your language and what a friend we have in Jesus kind of together. Not in that they accomplish the same thing, but so many times you hear Christians just say, "Oh, the Bible says, the Bible says, the Bible says," and it can be refreshing if it's instead of using the Bible says, you say, "Oh, well, Jesus said." So you're doing two things. You're kind of changing the way that we would say something. But then we'd also I like Alan's title of the tactic. It's let Jesus take the heat.
Yeah.
Actually, I was just out and about today, and I was talking to a supporter of mine, and she was at your presentation at Living Oaks Church, Alan, and she just was telling me how taken aback she was by it and how it actually changed her view of the issue of LGBTQ stuff and kind of softened her a little bit. And you mentioned that tactic in your talk.
Yeah, right.
And she brought this tactic up, what a friend we have in Jesus, or let Jesus take the heat. And it's such a good thing. Well, I'm not the one that's saying you're going to hell. Like, that's not me. I don't want anybody to go to hell. But that's not me. That's not me saying this. This is Jesus, or this is God, or this is Paul, predestination stuff, right? Whoa. I'm not saying this, the Apostle Paul is saying this. I think that's brilliant. And it really does help diffuse, take the heat off of you. And it's true as well. Like it's not like a word game we're playing. We're not shifting blame or anything like this. It's true. Yeah. And then the power of so you explained really well, Alan. And in your example, I think that you just gave was a really good example of that. And I actually took a note in my book as you were speaking about that. Because so often people bring things up that we can agree with. So one, we're finding common ground, and we're just like, yeah, okay, if you were born in Saudi Arabia, you wouldn't be a Christian. I agree, most likely. So what? Now let's talk about the issue at hand. Let's talk about the merits. Let's talk about the evidence. Let's talk about the conclusions that we can draw from them. But yeah, all these mini tactics, like you said, Alan. Alan, you just did really well tonight on this chapter, man. You took everything. I think this chapter was a great addition. I love the idea of mini tactics. How clever!
Yeah,
it's so clever. So, Tim, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, man, I just agree with you guys, 100%. The watch your language. I was jotting some things down, and it's true. Follower of Jesus. I try to use that instead of Christian. I've started using moral crimes instead of sin. And again, not because I think, sin is aggressive or something. I just think, people hear that term and it's lost all of its, force. So maybe there's another way to put it. Beliefs being convictions, faith being trust. When you're talking about Christ, talk about Jesus of Nazareth, the person in history, that kind of thing. So I thought Greg is really good about being precise in his language and his terminology. In fact, I think we were doing a live stream the other day, and I said something about, the story, and he's like, counts. It's got to be, in that historical account of, Paul or whoever. I don't know what I was talking about, but and I said to him, dude, the reason I use the word story is because I read the story of reality a number of times, and you use the word hundreds of times. What I should do is get the Kindle version and look up how many times he uses the word story, because he gives me such a hard time for it. Power of so, love it. You guys, moving towards the objection. I'm working on a red pen right now. I'm going to send it to you guys. See what you think. And the challenge is the one less God. You know, the atheist says, I just believe in one less God than you. And I love Greg's response. You know, move towards it. He says, you're right. You do believe in one less God than me. Now what? You know? Okay. That's what makes you an atheist and me a theist. You know, you believe in one less than me, which means you believe in it. Yeah.
You're great at math.
Yeah. So now what? We lost our buddy. So
he doesn't like anything anyway.
Yeah. So anyways, the moving towards the objection, that for me was a good one. Sticks and stones. Yeah, just asking, what do you mean by intolerant? Actually, I think Chris had a question here. Let me throw it up. Does this happen to you, all three STR speakers, at speaking engagements very often? Ad hominem attacks during Q&A, topics related to perhaps, you know, that kind of thing. I would probably say we lost Alan, and it probably happens to him the most. So he'd be a good guy to weigh in here. It usually doesn't happen to me. The only times it happens, oh, he's gone again. The only times it's happened to me was when I speak on truth. Truth is very controversial for whatever reason. I've had people get up, walk out while I'm speaking on truth. And by the way, I use the "what a friend we have in Jesus," or whatever Alan calls it. When I'm talking about truth and Jesus being the only way and this kind of thing, I always make sure, like, this is what Jesus held to. He's the one who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Okay. No one comes to the Father except through me. That's not Tim speaking. That's Jesus speaking. And this is where people have called names. You know, you guys are really, you know, intolerant. You're arrogant. You're being ignorant, you know, of all these other world religions or something. So it does happen. And what you do is, and it gets kind of tense, and I try and, you know, make a joke about it. And just try to cut the tension, you know, look at, but will ask what they mean by those terms, you know? So that's a good question. I don't know if have you been called names, John? Besides from people at Stand to Reason.
Well, other than you calling me all those horrible names before we came on, yeah, every once in a while, not on, probably not so much speaking, but just in, like, I do a fair amount of evangelism, on the street. So less now that since I've joined the team at STR, but when I was just a pastor, and I used to do outreach regarding abortion. In that setting, all the time I'd be called unbelievable names. Actually, my family, when I talk to them too, sometimes will whip out the bigot word, or you know, call me some names. But like you, Tim, it's if you're able to slow things down, you know, and come to an understanding that the reason why that's happening is probably because they've lost the argument for the most part. So it's more of a defensive thing, and you can kind of either point that out to them, or you could just say, you know, well, what do you mean I'm a bigot? What does that mean to you? But Alan, I think, of all the STR members, probably gets called the most names out and about his events, which is so crazy because he's like the nicest guy of us all. You know, he's never a jerk. Me and you, Tim.
Can I see a box, but can you actually see Alan? No,
I see a like a salmon color.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, here we go. I think we're gonna get him now.
We're gonna get him back. Alan's the glue that holds this all together, man.
He's for some reason keeps dropping off. Here's another question though. This is a good one. What's your opinion of scientism, and how would you object to this? Well, scientism is the idea that it's how you know something, and scientism says we know things through only through the five senses, through the sciences. And it's really easy to refute scientism, I think, because scientism actually is self-refuting. the statement that you can only know things through the five senses is itself a claim that is not known through the five senses. It's a philosophical claim, not a scientific claim. And so scientism, formerly known as logical positivism in the 1930s, and this, I mean, now it's pretty much recognized in philosophy that scientism is a self-refuting philosophy. Yeah. So it's true that we can know lots of things through the five senses, but scientism says you can only know something through the five senses, through an empirical study or something. But we know lots of things outside of that realm, including, spiritual truths. And philosophical truths and theological truths and all that other stuff. So that's, Alan, you missed a good question though. And it was about being ridiculed.
Being a bigot.
Or being called names, ad hominems. And we thought, you're probably the one guy who experiences on our team who would experience that kind of pushback the most, especially online. But have you received that kind of abuse in live events?
Ad hominems.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just the example I gave when I was at that university, and I get a lot from events where I speak on Islam, and Muslims will come to my event. So not all, in fact, not even most, but a lot of times I get some pretty significant pushback on that, on homosexuality and abortion. Those are the three areas I think I get the most pushback on, where people will just, I mean, it's basically a form of dismissal, right? They're just calling me a name, dismissing me for my view.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we took care of that one. Oh, there's Jorge. What's going on, man? Good to see ya. Some big ups. Looks like there might have been some problem with the feed. Patty's saying it might be freezing up. Could be just her computer, though. I don't know. We were having some technical difficulties with Alan connecting there. Was that on your end, Alan?
Yeah. This app that we're using crashes my browser. I don't know why. Nothing else.
We got to find something else. We always say that, though.
Yeah, we always say that.
Okay. Let's do the last chapter. Let's do the speed round here. We can probably keep it under an hour if we jump into this. So chapter 19 is called More Sweat, Less Blood. And Greg gets this idea from the U.S. Marines. The more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle. And so his charge of this chapter is you just got to get out there and do this stuff. You're never going to get good at doing tactics if you don't just use them. And you don't have to be perfect. None of us are perfect, okay? We're figuring this out just like the rest of you, okay? And so, but the more you use them, the better you'll be at using them. And the more it just comes to you, like the power of so, Jesus taking the heat off. And by the way, Alan, I like your title better. I wrote right next to my thing here, Jesus can take the heat, this kind of thing. And I must have got that from you because I wrote that in my notes. So it's right there and you're able to use it in real time, okay? And then when you mess up or whatever happens, you can go back to the drawing board, think about the conversation, and then the next time you'll do better. But what do you guys think? Was there anything that jumped out in this chapter? I'll start with you, Alan.
Yeah, what I thought I was expecting him to say, and I'm trying to remember because I read it a while ago now, but he didn't bring up the whole bloom where you're planted, did he, in this? So this chapter is sort of the like where he commissions you to like here's a way to go out and put this into practice and to start and stuff like that. And so usually he talks about blooming where you're planted, which I love this concept because I tell this to countless people who come to me and say, "Oh man, I love apologetics. Like, what's the next step? What do I do? How do I become like you or whatever?" I'm like, and by being like me, they just mean like being in full-time ministry, using apologetics in some capacity.
Yeah.
And I'm always telling them, bloom where you're planted. Okay. So that's why I was a little bit surprised I didn't have it in there, but that's fine. I think the part that stuck out the most to me that I really liked is the dry tinder section.
Yeah.
And partly because it answers a question that, again, so many people ask me. They'll say, "Oh my gosh, I love apologetics, and I want to get this started in my church. I don't know where to begin. There's so many people who don't care about it. What do I do?" And Greg's idea is, well, just start small. Just find a couple of like-minded believers, maybe meet once a month or maybe every 2 weeks, and get that fire lit, get it burning. And then as you come across wet wood, that wet wood, meaning people who aren't, as excited about apologetics, will eventually might warm up to it. They'll become more dry tinder and you'll get a bigger fire started. And eventually you'll build momentum, and eventually you can have more stuff going on at your church pertaining to apologetics or the life of the mind. And I think it's just great practical advice. It's super doable. Anyone can kind of get started in that way. And I think it's one of the best ways to get something going in a church where maybe you don't have anything like that. So I'd say if you're in that situation and you're asking that question, focus on that section of the chapter. It's really good.
Yeah, that's good. John, any final thoughts on this last chapter?
Yeah, I mean, the dry tinder sticks out in my mind. It kind of relates to, I think, what you were saying before, bloom where you're planted. I looked at it like, because Greg always says that.
Yeah.
Before I was a pastor, I knew Greg before I was a pastor, and we went to the same church, and he would tell me that all the time when we'd be meeting. He'd just say, bloom where you're planted, where you're planted. And, but I really like the quick tips too. Specifically, I mean, I think all of them are good. First, be ready. Second, keep it simple. Avoid religious language and spiritual pretense. But then I really liked focus on the truth of Christianity, not merely its personal benefits. Because I often hear Christians, when they're evangelizing or when they're trying to defend the faith, many times it's based on our personal experiences, which are great. I think it's great, but they're anecdotal most of the time, I feel like. And it's not. It's a great way to start a discussion. It's a great way to share a piece of yourself with somebody. And it's a great way to kind of tear down some walls if you're being a little bit more intimate and personal with somebody, sharing your experience of it, or we have the benefit of becoming a Christian. Yeah. But I always, whenever I talk to anybody about this or in my presentations, I always say near the front of the presentation or the talk, like, I don't believe in Christianity because it makes me feel good. I don't believe in Christianity because it's gained me more friends. It certainly hasn't made me more money. I mean, before the church, I was working at a law firm making really good money. I've lost friends over this. I believe Christianity because it's true. Mm-hmm. And it's also true that if Christianity can be proven false, I won't believe in it because I don't want to believe a lie. And I think when you start to when we start to be able to communicate that, it's not all about a feeling, it's not a burning in our bosom. It's not it's not about what Christianity can get me. It's about the fact that it accurately explains the world around us. It's the best explanation for reality. I think a lot of people. I have an example. Can I share an example real fast?
Yeah, definitely.
I have radical life change. I go from an atheist, living like an atheist. I mean, I was living like hell. And my sister's visiting me here in Southern California, and she's noticed a huge difference in my life. And she's in my kitchen, and I'm trying to talk to her about Jesus and about the faith and trying to present her with some evidence. And I just stop everything. I say, Katrina, why do you think, you've seen a difference in my life, right? And she says, yes, you're completely different. I said to her, well, why do you think I became a Christian? Why do you think I am the way that I am? And what she said to me, honestly, she said, because I think it got you a lot of good friends, and it seems to have given you a good life here. And when she said that, I was like, whoa. And and it was just like, well, no, Katrina, I believe in Christianity because it's true. You know, not because of the benefits it has, because there's certainly things that aren't necessarily easy to say or beneficial, or I certainly don't do the things I used to do. So I really have just appreciated that Greg included that it's not about our personal benefit, it's about truth, and let's remember that we believe what we believe because it's true, not because of what it gets us or what it can get us. Luckily, and it's, I mean, ultimately in the end we get heaven, which is a phenomenal thing. So it's kind of like a win-win, but it's important to focus on the truth, I think. So that's what I took away. Well, that other than what Alan said.
Amen. That's a good. I think that's a good place to kind of leave off the book. I have nothing really to add to that. There was a few questions that came up here in the end. Todd says, can scientific data provide information for more accurate, objective morality? What book are you guys discussing? Well, the second is an easy one. That's Tactics by Greg Koukl. It's the 10th anniversary edition, came out ended 2019. So look that up, Tactics. We actually just finished the book. So we spent 6 weeks going through it. And that was the last chapter, chapter 19.
You can watch it all still. I mean, it's all, this is all
you can
available.
still,
yeah.
That's right. You can go on our Facebook page and I think maybe our YouTube channel and see the full videos. Each one's about an hour long. To answer your first question, certainly scientific data can give us information about, that a murder happened, for example, or some action has taken place, but science can't tell us whether or not the action is wrong to take, right? Whether you should or shouldn't do it. And so that's where science isn't the kind of tool you need to accomplish that thing. So because those are different categories, science and morality are two different domains. So I don't know. I don't know if these guys want to weigh in, but can scientific data provide information for more accurate, objective morality? I guess it just depends what you mean. Do you guys want to jump in?
Well, I think you addressed the main objection. I always like to say, science can tell you what is, but not what ought to be.
Yeah.
It can tell you the state of affairs about something in the natural world, but it can't tell you how things ought to be. So, like, for example, when it comes to the subject of homosexuality, are people born gay, or is it something else? Is it environmental? Is it psychological? Whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Maybe science can tell you something about how someone comes to develop same-sex attraction, but it can't tell you what ought to be. Like, should they follow through on those attractions and satisfy those desires? And even some of the most well-known people who identify as gay, like Dean Hamer and Simon LeVay, who are Harvard-trained scientists, will say, science can't really speak to values and morality. They can certainly tell you about, you're born this way, or here's this gene that makes you gay, which I'm not saying that they're claiming that, but it can't tell you what ought to be, how you should behave, what is moral, and so. But I think that was
the example that came to my mind was abortion, right? And so you have, morality says it's wrong to kill an innocent, defenseless human being. Okay, now what science can do is it can tell me whether or not the unborn is a human being, right? Mm-hmm. And so what kind of organism is that? Is that a human kind of being, or is it some other kind of being? And so that could kind of weigh into the discussion. But again, it doesn't tell me that I should not kill an innocent human being. That's morality. That's not science. There's another question here from James. Samuel 22:8, and it's actually Samuel 2 Samuel 12:8. Interested in how you guys would answer an objection regarding how God would have given David many wives, obviously in contradiction to marriage as designed by God. But what do you say when confronted by this argument?
Tim, I answered him already in the chat. I have a video answer to this question.
Oh, no way.
it's called "Does God Endorse Polygamy?"
Okay.
And that's the passage I addressed. So I replied to him in the Facebook page.
Okay.
On the Facebook comments.
Do you want to give me your short answer? Because I'm curious.
I put in the comments. I said I don't remember what I said.
Oh, okay.
Because it was probably a couple of years ago I did that, but
Yeah,
I'm sure it's something to do with. I'm just going to guess here, but I probably said something along the lines of God may have tolerated polygamy, but he wouldn't endorse it. You know, just like in the New Testament, we see Jesus talk about how Jesus talks about how God tolerated divorce, but that's not the way he designed marriage to be, you know?
So I don't recently, within the last month, I came across this passage and I was doing a little bit of digging and something occurred to me. I don't know if I got this from someone else. Maybe I watched your video, Alan. I'm not sure. But what occurred to me is because the language says, this is, God speaking through Nathan. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your arms and gave you the house of Israel and Judah, and so on. It goes on. What would happen when David takes over the kingdom, right, of the previous king? Well, obviously he takes over all of his stuff, and that includes his horses, that includes his army, that includes his house, that's going to include his wives too. And something I'd read.
Yeah, Tim, I'm looking at the transcript of the video.
Yeah.
On the Stand to Reason webpage, and that's my third point. I say the text doesn't say God gave David these wives to marry, but that God gave David your master's house and your master's wives into your care.
Yeah, he would have had to look after them.
He didn't marry them, but was simply responsible for caring for Paul's estate and household after his death.
Yeah. So to me, and even given the context of what this whole thing is even about with Uriah and Bathsheba and everything else, I mean, it just seems to me that this is not God saying, oh, you shouldn't, you're being judged for sleeping with another man's wife. Oh, by the way, here's a whole bunch of wives. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's not what's going on here. And so that would be my start. I mean, there's probably a lot that we could say. And of course, we're going to go back to what Jesus said, what was in the garden, the original plan. But just look at the context here. I think you could make the case that this does not say that he was sleeping with all these women, but he would have been there. He would have been looking after these women, right? And so that might be part of the deal there.
Yeah. So just look at the articles called "Does God Endorse Polygamy" on the Stand to Reason website.
Did you link to it, Alan?
I put a link. I thought in a response to the question he asked. I don't know if it's showing up.
I see your link. Chris. Thanks. He says, to get something going in your church, invite STR for a conference. Amen to that, bro. As soon as the quarantine's over, we'd love to do that.
Although I don't know if Chris is joking about this because he actually invited this Greg. Well, no, I don't know if I can say it. Well, now I've already brought it up. But both Greg and I have spoken at Chris's church.
Oh, okay.
And let's just say right now we're not. We don't have an invitation to come back.
Oh, really?
Just yet. Yeah. So
okay,
I don't know if he's joking about that or not. He's being tongue in cheek there.
It's got a smiley face, so I don't know.
Yeah, I know. Probably.
Okay.
So he's a Canadian. For Greg and
Tim, he's a Canadian, by the way. So
no way.
You know how Canadians are really sensitive about things. So I think we ruffled a few Canadian feathers when we were up there.
Yeah. See, they should have, Chris. Have me come out. I can straighten this whole thing out. You can't invite these Americans across the border. They're going to stir up trouble. Okay.
Yeah. Tim won't say anything controversial or true.
Yeah. There you go. Let's see. Love your insights, suggestions, humor, and your chemistry. Thanks, bro. So that's a really very sweet thing to say from Derek. Love that.
D West is my buddy.
Oh, is
him
he?
And his wife. They're awesome.
Nice.
He was an elder at one of my churches.
Here's a question from Don. Can truth be relative to the information you have or can be proven? I might need more info for this question, but truth is always we could use the word relative, but not as in relativism. Obviously, it's always going to be relative to a circumstance. Like right now, it was snowing here. I'm in the Toronto area. Okay, there was snow on the ground. It looked like Christmas morning 2 days ago. So relative to that period of time, yes, I could say it is snowing on the ground. But then by the afternoon, the snow had melted, and so then that what I'm saying, that relative to that point, there'd be no snow on the ground. So I think that there is a sense in which there's relative to the situation or circumstances or whatever that that could play a role. But we want to be careful on using the word relative, because a lot of people are going to confuse that with relativism, which is the idea that there is no truth, okay, to the matter. It's all just kind of up to the individual or the culture or whatever. So certainly more information and can help. I don't know if you guys, is that how you're interpreting this question?
Yeah, and you mentioned circumstantial, and it just made me think about how truth, like moral truth, can be circumstantial in the sense of, for example, if I push a woman onto the ground, like violently force her onto the ground, you would say, well, that's wrong to do. But what if I was pushing her on the ground because there was a bus coming, I was pushing her out of the way? Notice the same exact action and behavior on my part and effect on her part, in one sense, would be morally good, in another sense would be morally evil, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah.
But again, that doesn't mean truth is relative. It doesn't mean morality is relative. It just means that under different circumstances, it might appear different,
Yeah.
So, and I don't know if that's what he's getting at, but when you said circumstantial, just made me think of that.
Yeah, that's what I was getting out of it. How about Todd asked another question? What do you guys think about the synthetic virtue outdoor mask wearing? Have you guys been wearing masks outside?
Well, I wear masks whenever I go to a store, because it usually says you can't
you have
store
to
unless you wear a mask. So
yeah,
I wear a mask. I mean, I don't have a problem doing that. I don't know if it's effective or not, but
yeah,
out of compliance with the stores that are saying you can't come in unless you wear one.
Yeah,
I'm going to wear one. It's not a big deal to me.
Yeah. I saw someone cutting their grass with a mask on.
What?
I saw someone cutting their grass with a mask on. Like
outside. Yeah, I know. I
know.
see people driving in cars with them, and I'm like, well, that's probably not necessary.
Yeah.
What were you saying, John?
I was just asking Tim if he wears a mask.
Oh.
I like Alan said, if I have to go into a store and the store says we're not letting you in unless you wear a mask, then I'll wear one. Otherwise, I'm typically in my house, so or out, on the lawn. I'm not going to wear one outside. Okay. Chris says, let's go, Tim. So he's got me going in there. Okay. Maybe we'll take this one, last one. What's this say? Wives. Description is not prescription. Reporting is not approval.
Oh, that's about the question about second sin. Yeah. I noticed, I was looking at my transcript, as I was saying, and actually I make this point as well, that the Old Testament, and oftentimes in the narratives, is descriptive, not prescriptive, meaning it describes what happened, not what is prescribed. The only problem with that defense, though, is that it seems like God is actually the one giving him the wives. So I'm not sure that would be an effective defense against that argument.
Yeah.
But I think it is. I think that's a valid point to bring up. On this, the prescriptive versus descriptive, describing what was happening as opposed to, condoning it, because I think that there's I think that this question, and I don't want to get too far into this, but I think that there's a lot to say about this question, because it's more complicated than you might think. But I think you also have to rely on so you go to Jesus's teachings, yes, but you also rely on the very clear fundamental teachings of God, as far as the best possible scenario for a family, right? God has clearly endorsed one man, one woman, one life. That's so I think the pointing people back to that, and just because God for a certain time has allowed something to happen doesn't mean he's condoned it for forever. I don't think. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, that's like I was saying with Moses. Jesus says Moses allowed you to divorce, only because of the hardness of your heart. But from the beginning, it wasn't that way. He says so. Like you're pointing out, John, God might tolerate something for a time, but it's clearly not the way He designed things to be.
Yeah, that's good. Good word. How about we leave it with this one? Last one from Todd. Why does Greg love that 80s intro with the chicken?
That's not. Did you guys know that's not a chicken?
Yeah, I do know it's not a chicken. It's Greg impersonating a chicken, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people think, because it sounds like a chicken.
Yeah.
But that is Greg's voice. So,
yes. So he loves to hear himself.
Basically, that's what we're getting at, right?
You guys are gonna get fired.
Yeah. We've been like Greg see this episode.
He's
or
not
either one where I criticize his chapters.
So, guys, what we want you to do is bring your questions. And if they're to do with the book, that'd be perfect. But if you have any kind of question, we'll bring back the predestination question to Greg next week. But we're gonna have a lot of fun. Okay, so it'll be all four of us, and we'll tell Greg you got to keep it short because there's gonna probably be a bunch of questions, and so just write them down and we'll just read them off to him and see how he does, and maybe throw in our 2 cents along the way.
See how he does.
Yeah.
What?
I'm sure we're fine.
Greg's answers.
Yeah, we can edit them. So again, we appreciate you guys. Remember, Standard Reason's here for you. We're doing our best in this quarantine, to keep doing what we're doing. Obviously, we're finding new ways to do it, like this. And there may be another book club. We'll have to sit down and talk about what that would look like in the future, or maybe we'll come up with something new. We'll see what happens. But we definitely appreciate everyone for hanging with us, especially for the last, hour and a half. Take care. God bless you guys.
See you guys.